This is the outline for the Taking Action chapter, as I think it's called, Action and Movement together. I'm going to start with the ecological approach to perception and then talk about navigating through the environment in this PowerPoint. And then I'm going to skip wayfinding, and I'm going to come back to that because I want to get to observing other people's actions. And so in the next PowerPoint, I already had that put together, the acting on objects, so reaching and grasping, and then observing other people's actions. And so that will, at that point, we'll talk about mirror neurons. And if you are going to read a journal article for Friday for the eReserve extra credit assignment, it's either going to be a journal article that is on something about color perception. I'm going to go make sure that synesthesia articles in there in case that's an interest of yours. And then I think there are 2 journal articles that are looking at the possible purpose of these mirror neurons. So you can choose if you want to read about this, but I'd like to have a little bit of background before you do so. I'm going to start with this ecological approach to perception that really came from J.J. Gibson. He is a pioneer in this field, as is his wife, Eleanor Gibson. We won't talk about perceptual development this semester, but that visual cliff experiment that tells us about depth perception in infants was his wife, Eleanor Gibson. For J.J. Gibson, he felt that the traditional laboratory approach to studying perception really lacked ecological validity. So having people perform some task in the laboratory, often with something like a tachistoscope, as this was even before computers were in every laboratory, that was just, it didn't translate to the natural world or to the ecosystem, if you will. He believed that environmental stimuli are perceived directly by the mind without this kind of cognitive construction or processing. So he was very much a bottom-up approach kind of theorist and did not give a lot of acceptance to the idea of top-down processing. I'm going to start by talking about the optic array, which is really this optic flow information that our movement, as we are moving through the environment, produces certain invariant information that is always the same regardless of whatever environmental scene that we are in. 2 pieces to this optic flow. First, that there's a gradient of flow. Objects that are closer to the observer appear to move by faster, and objects that are further away appear to move by more slowly. We talk about this a little bit differently in depth perception as motion parallax, but it's the same kind of idea. And if you think about when you're on a highway, or let's use a highway, so that there are guardrails, trees maybe close to the highway, that those are, you're going by so fast that you don't even see the pieces and parts of the guardrails, right? And the trees are just whizzing by. And if you look back farther away towards a tree in the distance, or a mountain or something, or the clouds, which are even farther away, that appears to almost be remaining still in comparison to this movement of what's close to you. That, as we're moving, it's called the gradient of flow. Another piece of optic flow information is the focus of expansion, that at our destination point, there is no flow. So these 2 videos are both kind of fun to watch, I think. If you've ever been in one of those tunnels that's giving you this sense that you're moving in a certain direction, you'll see in this first one that these arrows are really providing optic flow or gradient of flow information, and it makes you feel like you're moving a certain direction when actually you're going straight. And it feels like you're going maybe to the right. I can't remember which direction it was when you're going straight. And so it throws people off balance. The second video is showing the gradient of flow. And I think in the video, those little arrows are short when they're close. And so that means fast, whereas in your book, it's the longer lines and longer arrows, that mean that's going by, that information is going by more quickly. So the second point is that our self-produced information is actually, as we're moving through the environment, is providing information that we can use to guide further movement. And this picture comes from, or well, it comes from their textbook that's trying to show this research that is by Barty and Laurent in 1998, where they were looking at gymnasts who were doing these backflips, and they would let them use their sight, and then they would blindfold the gymnasts. And what they found was that the more experienced gymnasts, cutting off that visual information, they did not do as good a job. So what they were doing is, if they're jumping too high, or they're a little bit off at one point, they're using that visual information to correct so that they can land appropriately and stick their landing. For novice gymnasts, being blindfolded didn't hurt them quite as much, so they weren't as good at using this visual information. But for most of us walking through a scene, we're professionals at walking through a scene, and so as we're moving, that information of our movement is guiding further movement. And his third point was that the senses do not work in isolation. So we don't just use our balance, we don't just use our vision, we're putting our visual information together with our balance. And this is just one example. And he gives you this thing to try, this kind of demo. If you try standing on one foot, you usually can tell that it's not that hard. But if you try standing on one foot with your eyes closed, typically that is harder for people, because that visual information is letting you know when you need to compensate for these kind of small changes in your balance. I will say here, so since teaching this class, the last, I think, year and a half, I have had this Wii Fit, and every once in a while it takes my measurements and has me stand still with my eyes closed. It says, let's try it with your eyes closed this time. And I always do a lot better, and it really concerns me that that seems odd. So while I think most people do worse with their eyes closed, and even the Wii Fit always tells me, you use your visual information quite a bit. Try doing this with your eyes closed more often. And I'm always thinking, hey, I'm doing better with my eyes closed. So I think it's typical to do better with your eyes open, but not everybody does, apparently. But I'm pretty sure I'd still be fooled by Leon Aronson's swinging room. So this swinging room, which is being shown to the right there, this is showing a toddler, and what they would do is provide the optic flow information. So the walls and the ceiling move, but the floor is staying still. So the toddler's getting the visual information, which he's trying to show with the flow in that far right picture, that they are moving forward. And what they find is that the toddlers do this kind of sway back to compensate. Even though, again, with balance, nothing has changed. It's just the visual information. And the statistics are that 26% of the toddlers swayed, 23% staggered, and 33% fell down from this swinging room illusion. So our visual information has a really strong connection with our balance. And just so you know, they have also done this with adults, and they find the same results. So aspects, if we're going to put this all together, aspects of Gibson's ecological approach. One, that we want to study active observers, not people who are sitting and perceiving something that from a seated position looking at a computer screen or something like that, but people who are active in their environment. Two, he does this identifying of invariant information that we can use for our perception, as well as to help us guide future movements. And three, we have to consider the fact that the senses are working together. Okay, and as we get to navigating, my first piece of navigating is this, the sources of information that people are using as they are walking. optic flow is certainly one of those pieces of information. We also have what's called a visual direction strategy, where if we have a particular target, we're going to keep our body pointed towards that target. And if we get a little bit off in one direction or the other, we usually turn so that, again, we keep our body pointed towards the target. And finally, we do use other senses, which isn't as clear when we have our vision available to us. But so in this study that's I'm kind of showing, or he's kind of showing in this picture, people were showed the target that's kind of up at the top. They either then blindfolded the people and had them walk straight there, and you can see that red line. They get really close to the target. However, they also had two other conditions. One where the person walks to their left a few paces and then is told to turn and walk towards the target. And one where they turn left and walk a little bit farther than that and turn towards the target. And you can see they're a little bit farther off, but they're still really quite close to the target. So what we're doing there is we have an idea in our mind of where the target is in relation to us. We're using information from the body, from those proprioceptors and from the muscle movements and kinesthetics of our body to tell us where we are. And we're doing this kind of spatial updating of where we are compared to where the target is. And in a study by Land and Lee, they found that driving is just different. So we don't have that same kind of visual direction strategy. If you think about what that means as far as the focus of expansion, that we tend to direct our body towards the focus of expansion. This study was done in the UK, so notice that they will be driving on the left-hand side of the road. In the study, they were measuring the angle of the steering wheel, the speed of the vehicle, and the direction of the gaze of the driver. So they were doing this eye tracking. And what those red circles are showing is, so on a straightaway, where they are looking is that red circle. And they're not looking at the focus of expansion. Where they're looking is in their lane. And when they're making a turn, you can see that they are looking at the tangent of the turn.